Whatever you see fit. Great, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. So this is officially the first session for commercial session for 2023. Our bi-weekly KW commercial SoCal meetings, and just good to have you guys over here jumping back again to the normal healthy routine. Whoever's going to join us right now, if not, you're watching us in the recording, so thank you. So great to open the year with Phil Atwan, our 1031 exchange partner expert. Going to hear from you, Phil, some recent updates, news, propositions, whatever it is that you want to share with us. Ask question, open for discussion, whatever you see fit, and let's take it from here.
It's my pleasure. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy 2023. I can't believe it's 2023. It seems to me that Y2K wasn't that long ago back behind us, but 23 years ago now. Unbelievable. So what does that tell us? Tell us that we're getting older, which is good, because if we don't, we'll be dead. Number two, it means that what's going to fuel us in the future are the relationships of people that we love and that we know, and people that we don't know yet. And that's going to help us in our business and in upcoming years. So today, what we'd like to do is, I've been asked, Kim was so gracious, and Minnie's been so gracious to contact me and say, can you go over the 1031 exchange thing? And can we talk about what's happening and refresh ourselves and maybe some new items? And how do we do business in 23? And honestly, it's not going to change in terms of our involvement, other than our phones may not be working or ringing as much as they did in the past. So it's going to depend more on our going out, our initiating new and better relationships to help us as we transition into seasons. Like Manny and I were just speaking just a moment ago, we're now in winter, and thank the Lord, it is raining, like it's supposed to be. And we're very grateful for that. But it's wintertime, and things don't grow as much as they do in wintertime. It's just part of this. And then spring is going to come on us. And then the days will begin to get longer, and things are going to start growing again. And then the summer will be here. And then we're going to go back to fall. It's just a constant change. So you and I have to be able to change to be able to make this happen for our businesses, for our lives, for our relationships, for the people that we love. So I guess this is the time where I would just interject something that we could talk about. I believe can you see my PowerPoint right now? Is that visible? Okay, great. Thank you. Let's kind of talk about what's happening in terms of a refreshment, and then maybe a couple of new things that have changed or that you need to be aware of. Number one, remember, it still gets down to this. In fact, I just had this conversation a few minutes ago with a lady up in the Bay Area who's selling property in Sherman Oaks. And she said that, I don't know if I should exchange or not exchange. And I said to her, do you have friends who are somewhat affluent financially? She said, absolutely. She said, my question is, out of all those friends that have, a fair amount of money and are affluent financially, how many of them own investment property? And she says a great percentage of them do. And I said, absolutely. And what do they want out of their property? They want monthly income. Folks, it doesn't matter if you own a commercial building that there's a Chick-fil-A in it, or a Trader Joe's, or a Starbucks, or a 99 only store, or whatever they call them now, because they changed, because nothing's 99 cents anymore. The bottom line is we want monthly income. It could be a multiple unit residential building. And we want to talk about those today, because there's a lot of people who are retiring who do not want to be landlords anymore. They want to be able to go into a triple net or some kind of commercial asset that they don't have to manage, on a day-to-day basis and collect rents and take phone calls of issues that's happening with the building or roof leaks or whatever it happens to be, right? So, but what do they want? They want cash flow. They want a rate of return on their money. They want monthly income. And that's really what it comes down to. And that will make people want to sell their property and to go into something that will generate more income, because income is what it's all about. That's the number one purpose of owning investment real estate. So you have 1 unit, you get paid once a month. You have 4 units, you get paid once a week. You got 30 units, you get paid every day on an average during the month. That is what people like me who own investment real estate, and people like some of you who own investment real estate, that's the motivation. The second motivation is, number 2 is, they want it to go up. Now, our value is going to go up in 2023 as they have in past years. The answer is, I don't think they're going to go up like that. If anything, they may soften a little bit, but that's not the point. The point is when you jump into investment real estate, over time, it's worth more. The biggest regret, and I'm going to ask each one of you just to think in your own mind, how many of you wish you had bought something 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago? Folks, over time, real estate goes up and then it goes down and it softens just like it's now. But this is the time to be aware and to get back into the market, because when it softens in time, it goes up again. The biggest regret people have, including me, is I wish I had bought 1 or 2 or 3 more buildings, because I would be making more income. Number 2, I would be worth more because the values go up. And that's what draws investors to owning property, because it goes up over time and it plays income. And number 3 gives me a tax write-off. I get to write off everything: the property taxes, the insurance on the building, some maintenance I do to the building, capital improvements I put into the building. I drive to the building, I get to write off my mileage. Everything is a write-off that is to be incorporated so you can do what? Right here in the bottom. So you can reduce income taxes off the rents you collect, because the more you make, the more the government's going to take. So the bottom line is, I was recently talking to somebody who just gone on Medicare, and they made the transition. And they were telling me that Medicare is a lot more expensive than they thought. I said, why? I thought it was less. And they said, because I'm making too much money, and they think I should pay a much higher rates. Folks, you have got to be able to reduce the amount of taxes you pay off the rent you collect, so you can make 50% or 60 or 70% of the income and keep that part, because the property is your property and it should be working for you. And investors will move properties around and buy up for the purpose of creating additional depreciation. Now, the bottom line is, remember, residential is a depreciation schedule of 27.5 years. Commercial is 39 years. How does that work? Well, you go back to what you were originally buying the property for. Your CPA will divide the purchase price into 2 categories: land value, improvement, the building value. The building value is going to be depreciable. They'll take the value of the building, not the land, but just the building value at the time of acquisition, and divide it by either, look on the lower left-hand side, if it's residential, they'll divide that number by 27.5. And that's how much depreciation you could expect to take to reduce the amount of taxes you pay on rent each year. If it's a commercial building, they give you 39 years. Now, most investors prefer residential in terms of depreciation. Why? Because you get more of the depreciation, maybe in a shorter period of time. That's still almost 28 years that you're allowed to depreciate the building. But the bottom line is that you get the write-off, and the more you make, the more the government's just going to take. So it doesn't matter if you're on Medicare or you're collecting rent, they want you to pay more if you make more, and that's what it's over time that they're going to take that money. Now, what are investors doing? They're re-leveraging the property. What does that mean? Well, a lot of these folks who've owned their properties, let's say for 20 years or longer, Now think about that. If you're talking, whether it's an industrial building, a commercial building, even if it's vacant land or even farmland, not that many of you are not working farmland because that's more as you go north, but the bottom line is whatever the property is, and you've had it for 20 years or longer, chances are pretty good your mortgage levels are pretty low or it's completely paid for if you've had it for 20 years or longer. Now, if you've been refinancing the property and taking cash out, then obviously your debt is higher. But the bottom line is those people are to be targeted, because if it's residential, multiple unit residential buildings that they own, many of them don't want to be landlords anymore. Why? Well, think about it. 20 years, you've had that. That means you're either near or in retirement for you to have a rental property for 20 years or longer. So you're very close to retirement, or you've catapulted into retirement. And a lot of those people, just like I said, they don't want to be landlords anymore. And they can do this exchange and buy like some of those buildings I just mentioned, like the Starbucks as your tenant, or the Chick-fil-A or Trader Joe's, or whatever it happens to be. And the bottom line is that they have less to do in terms of actual maintenance with the building. And they like that. DST is a possibility, but I think you're better off with some of these other commercial type buildings in terms of a rate of return. But this is what's happened. And a lot of these investors haven't realized it. They just see that their buildings are worth more in value. They also see that they have a lot of equity in the building. So why would they want to sell? The number one thing they say, well, why should I sell? My property taxes will go up, right? Prop 19 doesn't affect me in terms of being able to move my property tax base, because this is not a principal residence. This is an investment property. So why should I sell the building? I've got all this equity where I have very little or no debt. Why should I sell the building? Here's the answer. And I don't hear people say this a lot. The higher the equity that's in the building, the lower the rate of return is. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, think about it. If your buildings you've had for 20 years and you bought it here and now it's worth here, you've had a lot of growth of equity, which is a fantastic thing. But here's the question. Have your rents kept up with that? I'm willing to tell you the answer is probably no, especially if it's multiple unit residential. You can't raise the rent that fast because the building has grown that much in equity. So the higher the equity, the lower the rate of return, because you can't raise the rent to match the equity so you can grow in your cash flow, your income, your rate of return. And that's why people will sell and do a 1031 exchange. So they can re-leverage the equity to go into something that's going to be better for them financially, or frankly, they just want to get out of the landlord business. People ask me, about what happens when you die. Do you get a stepped up basis? How does that affect? And the answer is, well, you need to talk to your not necessarily a tax attorney, but your estate planning attorney who can help you figure that out. But think about that. They can continue to defer the tax through a 1031 exchange to go into high equity building that they can maybe re-leverage into something much better in terms of income for them and less work for them. Not pay the tax to do that, maybe take cash out at a later date, a year later or 2 years later, whenever they feel the need to take cash out. And when they die, it goes to their surviving spouse or their children or whoever their heirs are. And they receive it not at that low tax basis. Now, I'm not talking about property taxes. I'm talking about capital gains taxes or greater, because when they die, it doesn't go to the heir because of the trust at the existing purchase price, which may be 2 or 3 or 4, 500,000 or $1 million. It goes to them at the fair market value that the building is at that time that they passed. What an exit plan, that you can defer tax, make more income, and then when you die, it goes to your loved ones at a basis that's stepped up, which means if they want to, they can call you after the funeral sell the building and pay nothing, zero in capital gains taxes. Now, what are the taxes these days? Today, you're still looking at if you sell a property and you don't exercise a rental property and you don't exercise a 1031 exchange, there are 4 different taxes that have to be paid. That's on your screen. The first is the long-term capital gains tax. That's between 15 and 20% of the capital gain. Number 2, and you remember, it's not your place, and it's certainly not my place to act as a CPA and give out legal or tax advice, because to figure that what the gain is, they need to talk to their CPA, right? In fact, right here is a little worksheet that they can just kind of look at. It's just for general information. It's not for them to figure out their own capital gain, but it's basically the sales price minus the adjusted basis equals the capital gain, and that's what they're going to pay taxes on. So in this case, they'll pay between 15 and 20% to the IRS of that capital gain. A lot of people call me up and say, Phil, I want to do a 1031 exchange, but I don't know if it's worth it. Maybe I should just cash out, get rid of the tax, and pay the 15%. You know what my answer to that is? Excuse me? What do you mean 15%? Could be 20, right? But it's more than that, because there are 3 other taxes than number 1, which is the long-term capital gains tax. Number 2, you have to pay the Obamacare tax. That's the healthcare tax they paid when they passed the Affordable Health Care Act. That says your gain over 200,000, you pay an additional 3.8% to the IRS for the healthcare program. That's not just true in real estate, like investment property, but it also includes your stock, bonds, and mutual funds. Some people ask me, what about my personal residence? When I sell that, if my gain is over 200 as an individual or 250 as a married couple, do I have to pay the additional 3.8% because I have the 500 exclusion? The answer is yes, you do. Now, the 500 exclusion will cover that if your gain isn't 500,000, but if your gain is over that, you will pay the 3.8% healthcare tax. That's the second tax. The third tax is California. California charges on that capital gain between 9.3 and 13.3% tax. So now you've gone from 20 to about 33%, maybe, that you pay to the state of California. And the rumor is that California is talking about raising the cap from 13.3 to 16.3%. That's a scary thought. Number 4, when you sell investment real estate, you're allowed, like we just said, to depreciate it. Well, the government says it's a great benefit, and they're right, it is. But when you sell the property and you don't do another 1031 exchange, you have to pay a tax on the tax write-off of depreciation that they've already given you from that depreciation at 25%. So if your allowable depreciation was $400,000 as an example, you owe them an additional $100,000 in tax. If your gain is, if your depreciation was, your building's a little larger, it was at $1 million, you owe them another $250,000 in tax by paying number 4, in addition to the state of California at 12 to 13.3, in addition to the healthcare tax on number 2, in addition to the 15 to 20% tax to the long-term capital gain. There's a lot at stake, and releveraging the property is a great idea as long as they do a 1031 tax deferred exchange, because it allows them to defer the gain so they can buy bigger, better, or multiple properties. They don't have to put all their equity in one building. They can diversify it, some here, some there. They can buy out of state. They're not limited to California. A lot of investors, and I've seen since 2020 when the pandemic hit, a lot of them have left California. Honestly, 25% of my base leaves California since 2020 because they go to other states that, number 1, less restrictions to the landlord. Right now, they give more restrictions in California to the landlord, and a lot of people are upset that the tenant doesn't have to pay, especially with the residential property, because it's because they're trying to protect the rights of the person. But the landlord's rights apparently don't matter. Number two, it's taxes higher in California than it is in other states. Some of them are taking it to tax-free states, like Florida or Texas or Nevada, just to mention three. There's a lot more. Number three, those other states are receiving business from California and other states like New York, who have high tax rates. And guess what happens? It continues to make their prices go up. And their prices go up because of supply and demand and people leaving from California and states like New York to come to those types of states where the taxes are lower. That makes the values go up. So they can appreciate better in some places. So the bottom line is the purpose of the exchange is not just to defer tax, but it's to make more money, more income, more appreciation, more tax write-offs. And like we said earlier, if it's in a trust or they've consulted a tax professional or and more importantly, an estate planning attorney for alternative methods and details, maybe they don't need a trust. Though I think it's one of the best vehicles you can use. Their heirs can have a stepped up basis, so they can swap till they drop, and they could have income property that's producing good income. And when they die, their family could sell the property if that's what they want to do, and not pay anything, or just hold it and wait till it goes up and then sell it. And only the gain between the stepped up basis and what they sell it for is what they pay taxes on, and that's it. Here's a common mistake that is made in a 1031 exchange. It has to be defined as investment real estate. And there's only 3 definitions of investment real estate that you have to know. Number one definition is that it's held for income, that you charge rent. Now, you and I both know commercial buildings, sometimes even some residential buildings, go vacant for a while. The bottom line is, but it's held for investment. But if it's been rented or attempted to be rented for the last couple of years, it will qualify as investment real estate. It doesn't say residential, it doesn't say commercial, it doesn't say industrial. It says rented. That's all. Number 2, the second possibility of identifying investment real estate is that it's used in a business. So you use it, you're an owner user. Number 3, vacant land. Vacant land qualifies in a 1031 exchange. So if you want to buy past your land, yesterday I was in Glendale and I saw, I was at a big escrow company out there. And I was asking about this particular escrow officer because I haven't seen her in a while. Well, nobody's seen anybody with COVID, right? But I haven't even heard from her. Well, turns out she's acting in a managerial capacity, and she got married and moved to Washington State, and she has a farm. Well, guess what? She did a 1031 exchange into that farm because vacant land is considered as investment real estate. Whether you farm the land, whether you raise hogs or cattle on the land, or almonds or fruit, or whatever it is that you're growing, but vacant land qualifies, whether you're farming it or non-farming it, as part of a 1031 exchange. So a like-kind exchange means you are selling one of these 3. And it means you're going to buy one of these 3. So if you're coming out of residential and you want to go to commercial, that's not a problem. That's like-kind. What does not qualify as like-kind? A personal residence, a second home, or a vacation home. That's not like-kind. I had an older lady call me today. She was another referral. And she said to me, if I sell my building, but I want to buy a multiple unit building, could I live in one of the units? Does that disqualify the like-kindness? I told her it does for the unit you live in, but the remaining part of the building, which is going to be for rent, is like-kind. So you just simply prorate the personal part that you live in versus the rent part that you have out for rent. Remember, Number two, an owner user qualifies for a total amount of a 1031 exchange because they're an owner user using that building for their business. Before I keep moving, are there any questions regarding any of these things that some of you may have thought of? If there are, I'll be happy to stop. If not, I'll just keep going. Okay, I guess I'll just keep going unless somebody was.
By the way, Phil,
Oh, go ahead.
no, just thank you for the mix of just, kind of also the basic one-on-one and also the more of the what's happening today conversation, because I think people always need to be reminded of the concept of the exchange, but also like in today's terms, how you can take advantage of it. And yes, whoever's in the call, don't hold back. Just type in your questions or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Phil any questions. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Manny. Okay, we just talked about this. We just talked about this. I want to talk about this. I've been getting a lot of questions about that new ULA transfer tax on Los Angeles City properties, both residential and commercial. I'm not an expert on this, but I put some information and I think you should be aware of it. If the property, this proposed measure was sold as a mansion tax. Now think about this. They're asking people where there's a lot of tenants to say, should we tax people who are selling a property with this new name of a mansion tax, whether it's residential or commercial, to take care of homeless people if the sale is in excess of $5 million. So people who don't have to pay the tax, heck yeah, let's tax those rich people who own these buildings. Well, that creates a problem when people who don't have to pay the taxes are voting for taxes for people that they're renting from. What a lot of people don't realize is if you're renting from them, they're going to get that tax money from you, the tenant. But not everybody thinks about that. So this proposal, this measure was voted on back in November of last year. So basically, it's supposed to go to housing for homeless, but I just wonder whatever happens to that money, that it's supposed to go to the homeless or it's supposed to go to clean water or whatever. I don't see any accountability as to where it's going and how they're using it and how much it costs for them to get to that point. But this is what they came up with. A lot of folks say, if I sell a building, residential or commercial, in the city limits of Los Angeles, which includes much of the San Fernando Valley and other parts of the county, can I defer the tax, this mansion tax, which is an extra 5% tax? It's transfer tax, really. And the answer is a 1031 exchange will not defer that because it's considered a non-recurring cost to sell to the city. So basically, anytime you have a transfer tax of any kind, whether it's a mansion tax or a typical transfer tax of 4.5%, what happens is you pay that out of the proceeds of your sale and you exchange the balance. All right. But unfortunately, if we're red right in the middle, can it be deferred through a 1031 exchange? The answer is basically no. And that's important. Under this measure, basically, whether it's with residential and commercial property, it's valued over $1 million, but less than 10 million, it's an additional tax of 4%. While the sales of property values of 10 million or more are subject to an additional tax rate of 5.5%. This new tax applies to the entirety of the sale value, not solely the amount of that's excess over 5 million. So if you sell for 5 million and $1, guess what? That $1 takes you all the way back to the first dollar. So you have to keep it under 5 million. So my question is, I wonder how many sales are going to come in at $4,999,000 to avoid this. But the bottom line is that this goes into effect on all property sales occurring on or after April 1st, 2023. Here's my question, and I don't have an answer for this yet. I can guess, but I hate to guess. Does that mean any property that closes escrow beginning April 1st? So you better close your escrow before April 1st, or any sale that goes into escrow on April 1st, 2023. I think, remember, it's the government. So I think it's on any closing. So anything that you're selling now that will close on in April is going to be subject to this transfer tax, this additional transfer tax for the city of Los Angeles. A lot of people have asked me about Santa Monica, Brentwood, well, not Brentwood, Beverly Hills, and other cities. And as long as some of them are instituting their own type of transfer tax, including Culver City. But the bottom line is that you'll have to check for that particular city that's not considered the city of Los Angeles. But any city, like mostly I always think of the San Fernando Valley, because almost all of that is the city of Los Angeles. Well, guess what? You're going to pay that transfer tax. So if you have a commercial or residential building and it sells for in excess of $5 million, you will pay, and this 1031 exchange, unfortunately, will not be able to let you defer the additional, 4 or 5.5% tax you will have to pay to sell that property. And that's a steep number. That's an extremely heavy tax. So again, our goal is to keep our representative, our Congress, our governments accountable, to keep the 1031 exchange, to keep the stepped up basis, because they tried to eliminate that a couple of years ago, and to stop extreme tax increasing. But when they give it to the people to vote on, it makes no sense, because the people that are going to vote on are the people who don't own the property, which is really unfortunate. Really important that when you're listing and selling the property, that you have to know you have to use an accommodator, right? A lot of people ask me, do I have to use a 1031 exchange facilitator? The answer is yes, you do, but there's one situation where you don't. And that's, let's say Manny and I own a property together, 50-50 as tenants in common. And then that's one property, but we own a second property the same way as well. Well, Manny and I can exchange our halves with each other. So I own 100% of one of the properties. He owns 100% of the other properties. We can trade deeds as a 1031 exchange, as long as we're exchanging equal values. That's the only time you do not need an accommodator. Yes, these two, Manny and I, will close concurrently. But if I'm selling a property to Manny and I'm buying something from someone else, and I'm closing these two deals on a concurrent or simultaneous basis, that you must have an accommodator. It has nothing to do with concurrent. It's trading with the same taxpayer, equal values. And I'm not. I'm selling to one party. I'm buying from a completely different party. You must have an exchange facilitator, or the government will not in any way, shape, or form recognize this sale and this purchase as a 1031 exchange. CAR has two good forms: the seller's intent to exchange form, the buyer's intent to exchange form. That does two things. Number one, I'll look at the first one. This is the seller's form. This is your zip form, SXA. It does two things. Number one, it allows the accommodator to come into escrow to set up the exchange. Folks, I'm still getting 2, sometimes 3 phone calls every single week of people who have closed the sale without an accommodator. It's too late. You can't set up and backdate a 1031 exchange. It's not allowable under law. It's tax fraud. So be careful. Make sure that this form is involved, and it's good for commercial buildings as well. It's a good CAR form. I know some of you use the AIR forms, and that's fine, but the CAR, seller's intent to exchange addendum, is an excellent thing, because number one, it allows the accommodator to set up the exchange before the sale closes. So it lets us into escrow. Number two, it allows you under this form, if you go into section 3 is the cooperation. That means the buyer is going to allow the seller's accommodator to come to escrow to facilitate the exchange on behalf of the seller. But the second thing is it allows under number 4 to extend escrow. So you're going to negotiate up front to extend escrow. Now, I've seen a lot of these commercial buildings, some residential, where the seller tells the buyer, I'm just not going to close escrow until I get into a new purchase. So if it takes me 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, you're going to have to wait for me to get into escrow, and then I will close this sale after I get in escrow on my new purchase. I've got to know what I'm going to buy because it's difficult for me to buy. That's a little extreme, but I see a lot of investors who do that, and I facilitate their exchange. A second way of doing this, and this is maybe a little more palatable so you don't lose your buyer, to say, look, I might need an exchange on the sale. So my sale is contingent upon me going into escrow, approving a physical inspection or whatever inspections I need to approve, maybe even a title insurance report, a prelim, to make sure that there's no cloud on the title. And I'll be able to extend that sale escrow maybe 30 days, or maybe an additional 45 days, or an additional 60 days. So you don't lose the buyer, and the buyer doesn't wander away and maybe finds another property. Now think about this. Inventory is still very low. That's why our prices haven't come down that much. They've come down some, but not that much. Why? It's because there's so many more buyers out there? No, it's because there's so little inventory. It's supply and demand. This form could really help your seller decide to do an exchange, because many of them will not sell and do a 1031 exchange because they're fearful that they can't find the right property. Because you and I both know you have to identify your replacement property no later than 45 days after the sale closes. So this form will allow you to negotiate a contingency that the contingency is that you find the property if within 30 days or 45 days or 60 days, get into escrow on it and approve an inspection report, and then drop the contingency and then close the sale. And this is a really good way to get people to want to do business with you who are fearful because of inventory levels that they won't be able to find what they want, and then they're going to wind up paying all the taxes. That's really important. Next is the buyer's intent to exchange for it. That means when you go and give an offer to your up leg, you would utilize this form, again, to include the accommodator for 2 reasons. Number one, they're holding your money, right? And they have to put that money into the purchase. And number 2, they have to set up the exchange documents. So this property is a replacement to an exchange. That is so important. And these 2 forms will hopefully reduce the amount of stress and explaining that you have to do. If the other agent isn't that familiar with it, then shame on them. And you might have to explain it to them, or I can explain it to them. But this is a CAR form, so they can call CAR hotline and get whatever they need, you know, from that commercial end to be able to make sure that everything's in compliance.
Phil, quick question about.
Go ahead.
Thank you for sharing, because most accommodators don't really share those forms, so it's fantastic education, and yeah, simple access to our agents. So none of those forms is a binding form, right? It's just only basically, you know, what it does. It's just making sure to create a path for proper legal exchange, right? But again, it's not like a binding contract of any kind.
Well, I can't comment to that. You know why, Manny? I think it is binding. It's telling the buyer that look, I'm going to extend the escrow. I'm going to have to do it. And if the buyer agrees to it, it's binding. I mean, I think it is. But, you know, honestly, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an agent. You know, I'm a dumb exchange guy. But if you're agreeing as a buyer to cooperate with the seller's exchange, and you have this contingency language to outline how long that contingency can go for, it sounds like it's binding to me. But I don't know, your mind is better for this than my mind because you deal in this contract thing on a daily basis, where for me, I'm looking at it from a 1031 point of view. So,
And that was the intent, is to seek your point of view.
right.
Another question for you, going back just a little bit, tenant in common.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so nothing to do necessarily with the, when you need to fill Atwan in your deal and when you don't need to fill Atwan in your deal, when they exchange with one another, if it's the same property. But generally speaking, if you have a property just under valued, just under 10 million, and let's say 10 million, right? And
Okay.
you have tenant in common, two tenants in common, and one wanna exchange out, and that's a 5 million value.
Yeah, I had a lady from up north call me about that today. And she wanted to know, because she is a tenant in common. It's not an LLC, it's not a partnership. She's just a tenant in common with this other person. And she wanted, in fact, it was the same one I told you about, San Fernando Valley, and
Right.
she was selling a property there. It's in that case, it's $1 million. But so she'll be responsible for her half of the sale, which is 500,000, and she could exchange that into other investment property anywhere in the country. So that's not a problem.
Yeah, so can you go back a few slides to that, the most recent proposition that passed, the mansion tax, right, the ULA. So if I'm exchanging my half, and let's say just under 5 million, let's say the property, is like, again, let's say 9 million total. So it's going to be under that specific tax, but I'm only exchanging my half, which is let's say 4.5 million. Am I liable for that tax? So I'm not liable for that tax.
I'm thinking now, again, remember I said to you earlier, I'm not an expert in this.
Yeah.
I'm not, but let me tell you something. I'm going to think like the government. And what is the government saying? If a property sells for $5 million or more, or $10 million or more, you're going to be assessed additional tax based on this proposition. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the property sold for. Even though your half is under that limit, I'm thinking the way the government's going to, again, I'm just guessing, but I think the government's going to assess that. I think that would be a worthwhile question to a really good CPA or an attorney who would be able to look at this and read all the language of this to find out what happens. Because especially in commercial buildings, you're going to see, well, I guess, residential as well, you're going to see multiple owners who own the title as tenants in common. If this is sold by a corporation or an LLC, there's no question about it, because you don't own the property, you're just a shareholder of the property. So the owner, which is the LLC or the partnership or whatever, will definitely pay. But in TIC situations, you're absolutely right, Minnie. You have individuals who own a part of the property. How are they going to assess this? No one's asked that question except you, and that's an excellent question. So let me see what I could find out. And let me go back to my internal people, and then some of the other external people that we've reached out to as a company to see how they're going to handle this. And as soon as I find out, I'll let you know. Fair enough?
Yeah, thank you.
But
Awesome.
I'm thinking the government is still the government. And it was a $5 million or a $10 million sale. So they're going to want a transfer tax. Even though there's multiple owners, the sale still happened that way. Because I just look at it like the way the government does. And it seems like they're always looking at it from their best angle, not necessarily for your best angle, the taxpayer's best angle. So, but that's an excellent question. And I will follow up on that. I want to go into a couple of things. Remember, we just discussed how a delayed exchange works. But this reverse exchange, believe it or not, in this market is still very, very significant. It's hot because it allows the investor who wants to wait until they won't use this contingency language we just discussed. They want to wait until they get a bird in the hand as opposed to 3 identified in a bush or going into escrow. So what they do is they want to purchase and close escrow on this acquisition as their replacement property to their 1031 exchange first, before they even sell. Maybe the other property is listed. Maybe they're in escrow on the sale, but they have to close the purchase first. The government allows for that in a 1031 exchange to do that via this reverse. But remember, you have to have upfront cash. If you don't have enough cash to buy the property, you can take on financing, and that's not a problem. And this financing with the cash allows you to close the purchase first. But for you to do that, we have to set up, you see on the right-hand side in gold, an EAT, an exchange accommodation title holding company that will take title to the property that is being sold before you close the purchase. So if you're closing your purchase tomorrow, we set up the holding corporation, the EAT, today, and we take title to the property that's going to be sold. So now they don't own that property, and tomorrow they close their new purchase. You have 180 days to close that sale. So here's the big question. When does the 180 days begin? The day that the purchase closes, or the day before if we take title to the property that's being sold? And the answer is, if you're going in with a lender, then we will have to take title to the property at the one that's being sold the day before the purchase closes. That starts the 180 days. So if you're closing your purchase tomorrow, we take title today from your relinquished property that you're going to sell, or the ones you think you're going to sell, as your identification, and us taking title to them is the perfect identification. So that's when the 180 days start, the day before you close your purchase. If you're going to, in scenario number 2, going to go in all cash on your new purchase, then we are then able to take title to that new purchase. So your 180 days began the day of the closing of the purchase because you went in all cash. You did not have a lender who is dictating who gets title to what. Now, this is very important. Whichever property we hold, whether it's the one you're selling or the one you're buying, it's the client who has to maintain the property. It's the client, the exchanger, who has to collect the rents, who has to pay the property taxes and pays for the insurance and takes care of the tenant's needs, if that's the arrangement that they have. You know, it's not a triple net. So the bottom line is, it's the client, the exchanger, the property owner, who will continue to maintain and collect the rents. But the sale must be closed within 180 days based on which property we're going to take title to. The day before the purchase, we'll take title to the relinquished property. If they're financing it, if they're going all cash, we'll just take title to the new purchase property. And that's when the 180 days begin. But the sale must close within its 180 days, depending on which scenario it's in. That's really important. And this works a lot. Some of your clients want to do a hybrid exchange. A hybrid, you know, what is a hybrid car? It's gas and electric car. It runs on both. Well, a hybrid exchange says, I'm selling 3 properties. I think I gave you this example sometime last year. I'm selling 3 properties, and I'm going to put it all into one large property. That's one of our clients, or a number of our clients do that, actually. But in this particular example I'm going to give you, he had 3 different industrial buildings. And he was going to take all his employees and all his factory equipment and put it all into one large building. So he wanted to do a 1031 exchange. He had 3 properties to sell. The property that closes first initiates the 180 days to close a purchase. It also initiates the 45 days to identify what he's going to buy. And he did that. That's not a problem. The next property he closed was the second property. So far, so good. And he was ready to close his purchase, but he had to wait to close his third sale. But the buyer fell out. He could not meet the timeline to close the 3 sales first that goes into his new large building where he's going to house all his employees. So guess what happened? We set up the purchase partially as 2 sales as a delayed exchange into that purchase. And part of the purchase, we set up a second exchange called a reverse exchange, like we just discussed, where he closes the purchase first and then that third sale up to 180 days later. That's a good 1031 exchange. The government will allow you to do this hybrid. Another method of doing the hybrid is that you close a purchase first, but then you close your sale and you sell it for more than what you bought for. So the difference is going to be boot or taxes. So what we do is we have a reverse exchange set up for the purchase that closes first and then the sale, but the sale's too high. There's going to be a lot of boot. So we set up a delayed exchange at the time of the sale for the difference of what is not going into that purchase that already went into it. And then they have another 45 days to identify, 180 days to close for the remaining balance, so they don't have to pay any boot or taxes on the difference between the sale and the original purchase. Does that make sense? This hybrid exchange is a good way to go. We have a number of clients who utilize this, especially in their businesses. And when timing means everything and there's multiple properties involved, and it works. So there we go. There's also a build-to-suit exchange. People ask me all the time, can I hold back money from a sale, put it into capital improvements, put it into a build-to-suit situation, or just repairs, freshen up the property before I put it up for lease? And the answer is only under a build-to-suit exchange, not under a delayed exchange. Because in a delayed exchange, all the proceeds from the sale must go into the purchase, not the day after, for improvements or capital improvements, or I should say repairs. So what happens is we take title like a reverse exchange on the purchase of the new property. So if they sold for, let's say, 5 million and they're buying for 4 million, we take title to the $4 million property in this delayed exchange. With the remaining $1 million that came from the sale, we then write, we don't write checks anymore. We wire money to the builder to get them going, to get the supplies that they need, the building materials, and that the work has to be done while we're holding the property. But remember, a build-to-suit exchange is much like a delayed exchange. 45 days to identify from the time the sale closes, 180 days to close. So they have to close their purchase as quickly as they can. And number two, the remaining time that they have, that's when we start spending the money and the work is going to be done. By the end of the 180th day, they have to take title to that new purchase. That new purchase has to be what that property is that they identified, and all the specific capital improvements that they identified that was going to be done. So the bottom line is this build-to-suit exchange works. It's good for investors who are buying down and want to either build from zero or do a capital improvements to a building like TIs, right? So the bottom line is this will work. It's expensive. These types of exchanges start at $9,000 and just go up because of all the work and the holding and the paperwork and the attorneys that have to be involved in it on our end. But it works. It's a really good 1031 exchange. It's not for a simple little deal. It's for a very large deal where it makes sense to spend that much in fees to be able to take title to a building with capital improvements that you want to make. Some people ask me what else can be paid for Well, remember, anything that's paid for has to be identified. You have to identify what you're going to do to the building in the 45 days, not just the address of the building. But number two, and that includes materials. And number three, that it also includes entitlements. So you can actually pay for entitlements through that. Reimbursement on entitlements, that's a little debatable, but we can talk about that at another time. But that's what this build-to-suit is all about. Okay. Now, remember, in any 1031 exchange, all the cash has to go into the purchase, number one. All the investors must reimburse all the cash into the acquisition in a delayed exchange. That's why the build-to-suit thing is a completely different, though it operates like a delayed exchange. It doesn't let you put the money into the building for repairs or improvements later, because the government requires that all the cash go into the acquisition. That's why we have to set up the holding corporation on the build-to-suit, right? So when they get title, they're getting title to what they paid for. They sold for $5 million, they bought for $4 million, but the difference of the million went into the building as improvements while we were holding it. So when we deed the property over to them at the end of the 180 days, well, guess what? They bought for $5 million because all the proceeds of the sale went into the acquisition. Not so with a typical delayed exchange, because in a typical delayed exchange, you can't hold back money to put into the building at a later date. It's not permissible under IRS rules. So all the cash has to go into the acquisition. And number two, let's not forget this. Number two is really important. If you're paying off mortgage debt on the sale, you must reborrow the same amount on the purchase that was paid off on the sale. So if you sold for $5 million and you had $1 million of debt, you have to still buy for $5 million. And that includes reborrowing $1 million of debt or more. So let's break it down really quick. And I know we're just about running out of time here. So Manny, let's go over this. You can take off the proceeds of your sale only non-recurring costs to sell. This is like a traffic light, but it's, red is usually on top, right? Non-recurring is allowable to come out of the proceeds of the sale. So for example, what is considered a non-recurring cost to sell? And here's the list. You may want to take a picture of the screen. Commissions, transaction coordinators, if attorneys have to be involved or CPAs have to be involved, just for the purpose to be able to make the sale close, it's considered a non-recurring cost to sell. Escrow, title insurance, transfer taxes. Now, that's considered a not like the UTLA. That's a non-recurring cost to sell. So it doesn't have to be paid back to the exchange, but it doesn't defer that tax, unfortunately. But title insurance, transfer taxes, both city and county, recording fees, our fees, and any contractual agreement that the seller and the buyer made for the buyer. Let's say the buyer requested that the seller fix this and do that and whatnot, and the seller agrees to do that. That's considered a contractual condition of sale. Therefore, it can be paid for as a non-recurring cost to sell, even though that is a delayed maintenance thing that should have been taken care of. Or if the buyer asks the seller to credit them at the close of the purchase, the buyer's purchase, the seller's sale, and the seller agrees to do that, and it's a contractual condition of sale, they can come out of the proceeds of the sale. So let's take a look at this. If I sold for $1 million, we're just going to use simple numbers. My non-recurring, like we just discussed, is $70,000. That means my new minimum purchase price has to be $930,000. So $930 is my benchmark, not $1 million. Even though I sold for $1 million, it's the $930 where I have to hit. Number two, if I'm paying off $400,000 of mortgage on the sale of this property, then now my equity is down to $530,000. We hold the $530 at the bank. We put it in a client trust account. That $530 has to go, all of it, into the purchase of the replacement property. Number two, for me to get back to $930, I have to reborrow the $400 that was paid off under item number 4 in existing debts. Remember, that could be one mortgage, it could be multiple mortgages, it could be a HELOC, a second, a line of credit, hard money, whatever it happens to be, plus the first. That cash goes into the acquisition, that debt is replaced, that seller, who's the exchanger, buys for $930, they have a good 1031 tax deferred exchange. So really, an exchange is not just the sale and the purchase of investment real estate to investment real estate, but it's also replacing cash and replacing debt. So you walk away with nothing new, maybe the same amount of debt, maybe more debt if you're buying up. Some people ask me, can you put additional cash into the purchase? The answer is yeah. The government will let you put additional cash and or borrow more debt. How can you get your debt? New mortgage, new cash, seller carryback, assuming the seller's loan, or any combination of the above are considered as debt replacement. Many, there's a couple things I know we can talk about, but I think we might be at the end of our time. What is your schedule like?
Let's see. First of all, it's always good to keep some stuff for another session. But let's see if there's any questions so far.
Okay. Let's look at the chat.
Nothing with the chat. I haven't seen it, but I mean it's been such a great breakdown that you gave us. I really appreciate that. That was phenomenal.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm really honored and happy to do that for your team. You know, the bottom line, folks, the more you get to understand this, or if you need to, have your client speak with me. There's no obligation. I'll go over what they want to know. They have a lot of questions. What do I have to do to make this work? What are the government's minimum expectations for me to actually not have to pay tax, for you to list and sell, and then me to buy another piece of property? What do I have to do to perform? I'm always happy to answer your clients' questions. It's never a burden for me to do so. They can either email me or they'll call me. If you send them an email with me attached to it and introduce us to each other, I will reply to the email and put an attachment of how it works and invite them to call me with any and all of their questions. We just want to make sure your clients have all the information they need so they look back after this transaction's over and thank you. We want, see, people will either, you know, they'll speak highly of you or they'll speak lowly of you. They'll either swear by you or they'll swear at you. You don't want them to swear at you. You want them to be happy because they got their questions answered. They went to a credible source who can answer those questions for them. And I'm really honored to do that for all your agents, Manny.
Thanks, Phil. And then I'm gonna type on the
I'm gonna put a little page at the end here that I think might be helpful. Oh, I went on too far. There it is. That's my name and phone number. On the bottom is my email address. I have a corporate address and I have I put this on my business cards because it's a lot less to type than the corporate address. It's too long. It's confusing. This is better.
Yeah, thanks. And then feel free also, to go on our commercial website. Fill information is actually there as well. We add into our KW Commercial SoCal website. So just go to, again, KW Commercial SoCal.com.
Perfect.
Okay, so
can I just inject one more thing?
Yeah.
The key to 23 is going to be new relationships and getting back with people that you've done business with over the last, decade or however long you've been in the business, maybe longer, maybe less. I've got 20 marketing letters that you can put out to these people. It talks about all kinds of different areas of what we discussed today and other areas that we haven't even discussed today. And it allows you to get the ball rolling in terms of discussion to find out what they're thinking. Maybe they want to go out of state. Maybe they want to go into bigger properties. Maybe they want to downsize. Maybe they want to get out of the management business. There are so many different reasons why an investor will want to do a 1031 exchange. All that does is create new business for you. And for you to get the new business, you have to be the initiator, right? And these letters will help you to begin the initiating process. I actually have 20 letters, 20. Now, if you want, send me an email to philatwan@gmail.com and I will send those letters to you. There's no obligation or anything. I want you to have a good 23. For you to have a good 23, you have to be the initiator. They're just not going to call you up. Maybe, and God bless you if that's what they do, they call you up. But if that's not the case, just to initiate a thought to put a seed into their brain may just turn up to be a new listing for you in the near future. But many thank you again. That's all I wanted to say. I know we'll save the rest of it for part 2 of next time, but thank you for all you do. I appreciate it. And have a prosperous 2023, everyone.
Likewise, Phil. Thanks again. And
my pleasure.
Reach out to Phil if anything whatsoever. There's a lot of information. We're going to share the recording with you guys as well. So you can go back, or again, email Phil directly. He's going to share with you the data so you can have information to reach out to your clientele and definitely capitalize on that this year ahead. Other than that, thanks everybody. KW Commercial SoCal group. We'll see you in a couple of weeks in our next session. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Kim.